Hello, Laura.
Hello, Melanie. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And how are you? And thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to hearing about your story. So your initial motivation for being a teacher, was that a lifelong dream or just oh God, I've got to do something?
So I was in my second year at uni. I was studying English. And of course, everybody says to you when you're an English student, oh, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to teach? And I, up until that point, had said, no. And then suddenly when I was in my second year at uni and sort of thinking, I do have to start thinking about what next, I thought about teaching. And for me, the motivation to teach was really born out of, so I had known since I was tiny wee that I wanted to go to uni and I wanted to study English. It was always about English for me, because essentially I just wanted to read and write. That was kind of always my passion, always what I was into. And then suddenly faced with like real world, real life decisions at university, like what kind of job will allow you to do lots of reading and writing? And I wasn't particularly worldly wise. I didn't really come from a background where there were lots of people talking about their high flying marketing careers or publishing careers or
Yeah.
So to me, English was, English teaching was a way to kind of scratch that itch of, I love English, I love to read and write. So it was born out of the love for the subject, really. So I did my degree at Durham, and then I went to Leeds to do teacher training, and I taught in Leeds for 7 years at 2 different schools. And actually, once getting into teaching, I was kind of pleasantly surprised by, because obviously the other big aspect of being a secondary school teacher is teenagers. It's not just your subject area, it's dealing with young people. And actually, I was pleasantly surprised that, teenagers are fascinating. They are, every day is different. They're great to kind of interact with and spend time with. I'd done a variety of jobs while I was a student and beforehand. I'd worked in places where you were constantly watching the clock thinking, when is this going to be over? When am I going to be able to leave? In teaching, I don't think I ever looked at the clock ever. The days flew by. I mean, for good reasons and for bad reasons.
Yeah.
But actually teaching, so the first 3 years that I was in an inner city school in Leeds, and it was a challenging school, but it was a school that did a really great job with the kids that we got, with the catchment area that we were in. And then I moved from there to be head of department at another school in Leeds, but it was like an outstanding academy, a new academy in those days. And that was a very different environment, and probably more challenging on the kind of workload front. And not that any teaching job is easy going, but more challenging on the workload front and probably the mental health front. But it was tolerable, and again, the kids were fantastic. I had great. I always liked to kind of teach in GCSE and A level, and I had, as head of department, and it was a big school. We had a lot of those classes available and had a fantastic team. So spent 4 years there. And then after that, so at this point, this is like 2012, and no, sorry, 2011, and I just got married actually, and my husband and I were like, right, I kind of feel like we could do with a bit of an adventure, and we explored kind of different. I was kind of getting a little bit worn down by work in schools at that point. He was in a completely different industry, but was ready for a bit of a change. We looked at a number of things. We looked at volunteering abroad. We looked at doing a year's program somewhere. And actually what happened was the organization that he worked for had an opportunity in Brussels in Belgium, and he applied and got a job there. And literally within 2 weeks, my my sister randomly had seen a job on an expat website advertising for a head of English, which was my job at the time, in a British school, so a kind of private school on the like kind of leafy suburbs of Brussels, and very casually said to me and said, "Oh, if Adam's got that job, maybe you might be interested in this." Within 3 weeks, I had been to Brussels, been interviewed, just walked into this absolutely magical school environment. I mean, it was fun. I knew from the moment I walked in the doors, I thought, I have to get this job. And it was fantastic. So I had 4 glorious years there. All of the best bits of teaching, all of the bits that, we know as teachers and former teachers, all as good as we know it can be, fantastic students, fantastic supportive parents and community, school community, a lot of freedom. We taught an English curriculum, so we taught GCSE and A level, but we also taught the IB, the International Baccalaureate, which is a fantastic course. If you ever, I know that some independent schools, mainly independent schools in this country, do teach it. And it's a course that offers so much teacher choice, and especially for an English teacher to choose texts, there's so much more diversity, there's so much more representation, in terms of the kind of authors that you're reading and the type of text that you're reading. So it was just a glorious, free, very sort of liberal environment. This school, essentially, it was kind of founded by, I think, a group of hippies kind of 45 years ago, and it was all first name terms and no uniform and very kind of, because at first I thought, oh, maybe it's a private school thing, but for me personally, I've never taught in another private school or a private school in this country, but I hear by all accounts that it's not quite the same as this particular school in Brussels. And it was glorious. So that took me to 2016, and at that point, for reasons 2016, people automatically go, oh, Brexit. It was pre-Brexit. We came back, lots of boring reasons to do with tax status for my husband and his job, but basically you had to kind of get out within 5 years or find something permanent in Brussels. And we were a little bit, should we do this? Should we not? Is it time to go back to the UK? It was a really tough decision, but we did come back to the UK. And at that point, I was having my second child. I was pregnant, so I came back and thought, I'm going to come back to the UK and I'm going to have a little bit of a break, and I'm going to kind of see what happens next. So, right. Sorry, I feel like I've talked absolutely loads at you.
That's the plan. That's the
plan. So that sees me back in the UK.
Yes.
And when my second son was born, and we were kind of, we'd move countries, we'd move houses, then we bought a house, and it was like lots and lots of change. And then I thought, well, am I going to go back into teaching? I think as well, you often have the mindset as a teacher that kind of what else is available. I think that's kind of the whole kind of rationale behind your series, what can we do? Because you become a little bit institutionalized, I think.
Oh God, because I taught in the same school for 25 years. Towards the latter end, if I bumped into colleagues who had retired, in the local supermarket or at funerals of former colleagues and things, and they'd say, oh, are you still there? And I'd say, oh, I'm going nowhere, I'm institutionalized. And that is exactly the word I used to use.
Well, that is how I felt. I thought, I don't know. And especially because it was all I'd ever known. I went, from school to uni to teacher training I literally knew no other world. And I thought, well, I think at that point, on reflection, I perhaps should have thought a little bit harder about what my options were, but I genuinely did not know.
You don't, do you? You think I'm a qualified teacher, that's it. You think
that's it.
Life, don't you?
And I think you've just hit on one thing there. I think the qualification is one aspect of it, that is what you're qualified to do, and you feel like a bit of an imposter, I suppose, describing yourself as and the label, that's something I struggled with for a while when I was no longer a teacher. It was like, what do I call myself? Because people never say when you're a teacher, sorry, what's that? Whereas if you say I'm a copywriter, they go, oh,
Yeah, nobody
what
knows
does that
what
mean?
copywriter is.
No, nobody knows.
Conversation yesterday with the interview I did yesterday that will be going on, one before you, was very much, was it yesterday's or last week's? Anyway, yeah, what's a copywriter? What does that do?
What is that?
Yeah.
So I went, I looked at a couple of jobs locally, and then I ended up taking on an assistant head job, which, so, and it was kind of one of these funny jobs that's kind of still head of English, but also you're on the leadership team, and it was kind of a bit of an odd,
But we're only going to
straddling
pay you
thing.
the head of English thing. We're not going to pay
Yeah,
you head level. Yeah.
it was something along those lines. And I went back to, I did a little bit of work in the summer, and then I went back, I was going to say full time, but it was actually 4 days a week, but I was in 5 days. That was the kind of deal that I managed to carve with 2 small children at home from the September. And by the October half term, I was gone. I was signed off. I basically had a breakdown, and I wish that I had been, looking back now, I think, God, all the signs were there, you know, but there was just something that would not allow me to say, oh God, I've had enough. I think I need to step back from this. This is not, this job is not sustainable. It's not working with my family setup. It's, it didn't help that we also had 2 bouts of chicken pox, I think, in September, and a case of hand, foot and mouth. I mean, my kids were just at that stage where they were both in nursery, they were both preschool age, they were getting every illness under the sun. I mean, it was miserable. But so I really, one thing that I would say to somebody who is thinking about leaving teaching is, please try to be a little bit more kind of educated and informed than I was. You're not invincible. I think we're fed so often that, lines like, well, you get 13 weeks holiday, yeah, but and there is a bit of a kind of survival of the fittest mentality in teaching, and that ultimately was my downfall, because I thought, well, I'm not like that. I need to keep going, and I did keep going. I just hit a wall and disappeared.
That is such a common theme I'm coming across.
I mean, I can laugh about it now, but it really was not pleasant. And
And do you find that when you look back now with the benefit of that distance, that you actually can't believe the state that you allowed yourself to get into before you did anything about it? Because I certainly feel like that.
Definitely. Definitely. I look at my kind of working patterns now, and I still work bloody hard, don't get me wrong, excuse my French, but I still work really, really hard, and I will always do that. But it was almost this like ridiculously stubborn badge of honor, I will not be defeated. And it's ridiculous.
I know,
the things that we used to do, the kind of illnesses that people used to come into school with, just think, especially now post-COVID, you think, why did we do that?
Because of the absence management procedure. That's why.
Well, that's one of many reasons.
So you got to time October, and you thought, right, I'm in bits, I need out. So how did that process start to happen?
So I would love to tell you that I had this really inspirational story about how I built my business off the back. None of that actually happened. So I really had a period of enforced rest and recuperation. So I finished work in the October, and I was just really poorly for quite a long time. And even when I started working for myself, I was still, my immune system was completely shot. I got, illness after illness after illness. I'd have a couple of good days at work writing content, and then I'd be absolutely, I'd be like a zombie for 2 days. I had no kind of, I think I was so used to working full pelt all the time that well, one, I was exhausted, and two, I kind of knew nothing else, so that when I did work, I completely overdid it. And I'd be like, oh, like
Yeah.
a Victorian lady recline, I just couldn't, I couldn't sustain it. So I got to about February time, and I had been torturing myself, really looking back, thinking, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? And I did lots of thinking and had lots of conversations and lots of soul searching. And, it was all very eat, pray, love for a while. I was like, going out for long walks and thinking, what can I do? And for me, it came back to, the very reason that I trained as a teacher was, like I was saying before, because I loved to read and I loved to write. And actually, without realizing it, as a teacher, I had exposed myself to a couple of, so I'd started to do a bit of blogging for a wedding blog, and it was a paid gig, and it was just something I'd ended up doing. I sort of blogged my own wedding a long time ago, and then somebody had got in touch, and I ended up doing a bit of that. But also, when I was at Brussels, when I was at the school in Brussels, it was like the legacy responsibility of the head of English to sort out the school magazine, which was published once a year. Now, when I say school magazine, it was like, oh my God, we had like adverts for Toyota in this magazine. It was like a ridiculous.
Yeah.
It was like I think we used to sell like 40,000 euros worth of adverts. It was ridiculous. So, and it was quite high stakes as a result. So, when you were writing an article, you were writing an article and you were, I don't know, interviewing the British ambassador, or it was quite a high profile piece of work. And I loved it. I think previously heads of English had been like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do this on top of my day job, which, okay, I understand. But it was fantastic, and alongside that, there was the board of governors had various different sub-levels, and one of them was devoted to PR and marketing. And because of my magazine involvement, I would sit on that. So I'd be sitting in, these kind of meetings, and they'd be showing adverts of that were going up around Brussels on billboards and things for the school. What do you think? How does that slogan? Does that work? Do we think that image works with that slogan? And it was like, oh my God, this is really fascinating.
So without knowing it, you were actually serving mentorship by doing that for what was going to come later. Excellent.
Yeah. I mean, it was purely by chance, but so there were a few little things like that where I'd sort of thought maybe I could, and at first I sort of thought kind of more obviously, I thought maybe I need to do some journalism, maybe I need to just write about education, maybe, or anyway, I finally somewhere discovered the term copywriter and thought, that's the thing that I can do. I feel that's the thing that I want to do. And gradually over time that has expanded. I still write an awful lot of written content, but I also do sort of more general kind of comms consultancy and brand consultancy as well. So that has kind of developed a bit over time. But so this is kind of February, March time. I thought very tentatively, this is what I'm going to do. My first big expense, because I was obsessed with having a website, was I need a website. So I had been kind of making connections online, sort of trying to, getting on LinkedIn, getting on Instagram and Twitter, and just kind of, all of those fantastic networks that are out there. The best, I'm sure everybody says this to you, but one of the best introductions you can have to copywriting is just connect with a load of copywriters and comms and PR people and marketers, whatever, online, because suddenly, I used to think LinkedIn was so boring. It's because I followed lots of boring people.
LinkedIn's brilliant.
If you follow loads of people in comms and written content, it's really entertaining. Who knew?
People who know how to write about interesting things. Yeah,
and it's really helpful. So that was genuinely a really good starting point, I think, for me. So I got my website set up finally. That was good. That was helpful. And then the next big question, I suppose, is where does the work come from? Where do you get the work from? So I again sort of agonized and overcomplicated and overthought that whole issue, when actually the answer to that question was, you need to tell people what you do and you need to announce that you are looking for work. And I used to say, oh, it's, social media hasn't really, it wasn't really that got me going in my career as a copywriter. It was people, but actually it was talking about what I was doing on social media, in person. I never did a lot of networking events. I have done the odd one here and there, but that hasn't been a huge way of building my business. It's been much more about kind of speaking to well, the people that colleagues of colleagues, friends of colleagues, people. So many people, once you say that this is what you're doing, so many people will say, oh, I know this person who's just said, oh, it sounds like she might do the kind of thing that you're looking for. Or the fact that you announce that you're doing it gets somebody thinking about something that they need for their business or their organization or whatever. I mean, I have been fantastically well supported by the people around me, and it is so nerve-wracking at first, kind of sticking your head above the parapet and saying, this is what I'm doing. And it is a mentality thing. I work in the public sector, I get a salary every month. You feel switching to that self-employed mindset. I couldn't believe it the first time somebody paid me. It's like, there is money in the system that has ended up in my bank account because I said that I was able to do a job. I could not get my head around it for a long time. But that is the reality. I'm speaking to kind of teachers and ex-teachers here. You have a skill set that is highly desirable and highly versatile, and can take you to so many places beyond the classroom. And when you first step out into that world, I think it can be really difficult to see it, but that is the reality, without a doubt. And it takes it takes a little bit of adjustment and getting used to, but it's a really pleasant adjustment. And it is the truth. And yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. God, I just wish I'd done it differently in the first instance.
So in our chat before we started recording, you said that you hadn't done any formal training for this, but that doesn't mean that you haven't worked on honing your craft. So how do you go about that? I mean, you said about following other copywriters on social media and stuff, but if you have to sort of explain in stages to people how you went about that, where you turn to for advice, because I found that on social media people tend to be very generous with their time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, on training, I have done odd bits here and there. So I've done a couple of social media courses. I did do a period of kind of general business coaching, but that was more about I actually found that my difficulties or my challenges were more around things to do with that self-employed mindset. So, finding your price point, being able to price up a project, and not even the mechanics of doing that and writing the proposal and, detailing it and breaking it down, but more the kind of, God, can I really charge this? Can I really? So I have done some coaching, but it was more about that rather than about particular writing skills. The work that I do tends to be quite creative as well. So it can, can you come up with a name for this particular restaurant? Or can you come up with, I do quite a lot of hotel work, we need a concept for our meeting rooms, and this is where the hotel is, and this is the location, and can you sort of piece something together? So a lot of that is kind of creative work. I know that kind of technically as well, I sort of have the confidence as an ex-English teacher to know technically that I can write. But in terms of kind of professional development as a copywriter, probably the thing that I found most useful, other than connecting with the people online, and there's so much kind of informal development out there in that form, is the work that I have done. So I often, when I first started out, actually, I did a lot of collaborative work with somebody who was running her own digital marketing agency, and she needed a specialist copywriter that she could just send work over to. And of course, I was desperate for work at the time. And it was I probably, when I was working with her, I probably produced content for 20 to 25 different clients. There was such a variety of different sectors. I mean, it was being kind of dropped in the deep end, but it was such a fantastic learning curve, and it was a great way to build confidence as well. So that was really helpful, working with that particular person who had this kind of client base, and it was super diverse and required me to do lots of different. This person wants a blog post, this person needs their social media posts writing and scheduling, and there's a bit of research needed for that. This person wants a new about page for their website. It was really versatile. But then I would say as well, I've also done quite a bit of work as the kind of on-call copywriter for a couple of design agencies, so kind of people who are at the web design end of things or the graphic design end of things. And it's so funny kind of dealing with them and working with them, because in the first instance, they're like the gods. They know what they're doing, they know what they're about. And actually, to see that their process is creative and experimental, and I think you go into this world and you think, well, there's a blueprint, there must be a blueprint, there must be, especially coming from a teaching background, there must be a scheme of work, there must be some kind of
criteria.
There must be, especially when you're used to teaching to a mark scheme. Where's the mark scheme? There is no mark scheme in copywriting. It's much more freeing, and it's much more creative than that. So to work with kind of the people who are on the visual end of the brand identity, and to be able to throw ideas around with them, and that's been a fantastic process as well. Like really, really fun, but also like super educational and helpful for me as a professional.
Yeah. So would there be anything, you might not want to talk about this, but would there be anything that's happened since you set your business up where with hindsight you thought, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, I shouldn't have done that, that went wrong, that was bad, that could be provide a salutary lesson for anybody?
Let me think.
It doesn't have to have been, I'm just curious.
I mean, I'm sure lots of former teachers feel this way as well, that you kind of give yourself a hard time if things aren't absolutely perfect. I think I hope this isn't
I'm not talking about anything that your brain monkeys beat you up for, because no, but anything that really did, maybe lost you lost you some income, or cost you money that was a bad step to take, or I don't know. I mean, like, for example, I spent ages building my own website.
Oh yeah, flipping heck.
Wouldn't do that again.
Well,
and save your website so you can afford to get somebody to do it for you, because
do you know, I would say that because like I was saying in our little pre-chat, I was a bit obsessed with having a website in the first instance, and it was a bit of a brain monkey thing, because it was like, I feel like an imposter unless I have a website.
Don't listen to anybody who tells you that WordPress is easy.
It's so not. This wasn't even WordPress, this was Squarespace, but I did get somebody else to do it for me. And actually since then, because this was 2017 when I my first website, and I redid it myself on Squarespace, which shows you how much I've learned from working with all the techie people and all the graphic design people. And I had a few people I could call on some favors from.
Yeah.
But actually, I would say, please do not kill yourself over the need to have a website. That's not necessarily the case in the first instance. Update your social media bios. Exploit all of those different sections that they give you now on LinkedIn, and get some posts up there, and I think you think in the beginning that a website is going to kind of make all those insecurities vanish. It doesn't. And it's quite expensive.
Yeah, and then every month when Google tell me how many people have looked at my website, It's never going to be more than 50. Seriously, never.
And then you look at where they're coming from, the referrals, and it's all from your own social media. So it's all people who
Nobody has ever come to me and said, "Oh, I came across your website." Nobody.
The other thing I would say is about a niche, because again, I was obsessed with, after the website debacle, I was like, I must have a niche. And for it, again, the kind of ex-teacher insecurity raised its head. Well, if I'm an ex-teacher, the only thing I'm really qualified to write about is education. And don't get me wrong, I have, and I do write about education, and I've done some, really nice work in that sector. I've done some work for my old school, funnily enough, in Brussels. I've done, I answered a shout out on Twitter once, and I got a regular gig writing for the Tess. I mean, when does that happen? So that was like a journalistic type job, but I mean, that just shows you the opportunities that are there. And that, that was a great gig. So by all means, you can write about education, but also, the skill set that you have as a teacher in terms of research and sheer work ethic and everything else means that it is possible to write about things beyond that. And also, if you're looking for a niche, it doesn't necessarily have to be a sector or an industry. Sometimes your niche is your process. It's how you work and the type of relationship that you have with your client, or maybe it's the type of people that you like to work with. Maybe it's I at the moment do work across so many different sectors, but I would say that the clients themselves, the people that I deal with, have lots in common. They're all they're all super personable. They've all got quite a dry sense of humor. They're, I don't know. I think if you were to line them all up, you would kind of see that I have a client type. And actually, it's not to do with their sector necessarily. It's to do with, the kind of people they are and the way that they like to work. So yeah, don't beat yourself up about that. That feels like a bit of a cop-out answer to your question, but hopefully it will suffice.
And last question, from the point where you admitted to yourself that you were now a copywriter to the point where you thought, I'm now actually making a living, a sustainable living at this, how long would you say that period of time was?
So I set myself a target. I said, if I could make as much money as I would make supply teaching, part-time, because my kids were in nursery at that point, and I was saying to myself, I'll only work 3 days a week. So if that was my yardstick, I got to that point pretty quickly, because for all teachers are told that they can't do anything else, actually supply teaching pay is not that fantastic. It's certainly not as good as a freelance copywriter rate. So I got to that point. If I did my website in February, I was hitting that point consistently by the summer, I would say, of that year. And I mean, since then, it's kind of, I hire an accountant. That's another piece of advice that I would give to people, because I hate numbers. Why would you do that yourself if you don't have to? But my figures have gone up every year, and I work far fewer hours and on my own terms. And that's the bit that is priceless. That's the bit that you'll never get anywhere else. It's just, I cannot recommend it enough. And finding the confidence within yourself to think, I can do this, rather than falling off the edge of a cliff like I did. That's not the advice I would give people.
Don't wait until it's easier to leave than it is to stay. Wait while you're still in one piece. Right. I think that's a really good note to leave it on. So just leaves me to say thank you so much. You've given us a really good insight into your route out of teaching. Thank you very much, Laura.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I was just about to end the meeting.